Hi class, this is Dr. M, and today we are going to talk about training and development, and this is chapter 8 in your textbook. U.S. companies spend over $164 billion on training and development, and employees spend an average of 33 hours in training per year. And you may have experienced training yourself. Unfortunately, training is not always developed in a thoughtful manner or evaluated properly. And so we're going to talk in this video and in the next video about how IO psychology can help inform the development and evaluation of training. We have a diagram on slide 4 of the training process. And as you can see, we start by conducting what's called a training needs assessment. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. We consider characteristics of the trainees and the context. We choose and administer the training method, and then we evaluate training. So consider this scenario. An organization that you're consulting with, let's say organization Y, has very high levels of worker stress and turnover. So employees are stressed out and they're leaving. As a consultant working for organization Y, they ask you to do a series of stress management training workshops because they think that this will help their stress problem and their turnover problem. Okay, great, right? Well, actually, no. What we should do at this point is stop and ask a few questions. First, is training the best solution for a situation like this? So let's think about it. What other questions would you want to ask if you encountered this situation? Perhaps you would want to ask, what is leading to worker stress? Perhaps there are things that can be assessed and mitigated at that level rather than helping to manage the stress, maybe eliminating the source of stress or decreasing the source of stress. You could also look to see turnover rates in other organizations and similar industries to see if turnover is indeed a real problem and higher in this organization than other organizations. You could do a series of steps in terms of researching this question. You would also want to know if the organization is going to support the success of this training. Are they going to provide resources for the training? Are they going to allow workers to attend the training, for example? And another question you would ask is, does everyone need the training? So this is a little exercise that's meant to illustrate that we don't always want to jump into training without taking some time to provide a thoughtful approach to it and ask these important types of questions. This is what we are talking about in terms of when we say training needs analysis or training needs assessment. And here's an IO Psych meme. I have introduced some of these throughout the semester, and it was relevant to this lecture today. So the manager who wants to do training to solve the problem wants to go ahead and jump right in, but IO psychologists advocate for a needs assessment first. A training needs assessment is the process by which an organization identifies the organizational factors that will support or hinder the training program, what actually needs to be trained, and who needs the training. So we're going to talk about each of these levels. So the first level here in our training needs assessment is an organizational analysis. The organizational analysis is meant to identify those issues that can help or hinder the effectiveness of a training program from the level of the organization. So the series of questions that are on slide 8 are relevant to this. Why is the organization wanting to start a training program? So is the training aligned with its strategic goals? So you probably remember from previous chapters that we've talked about implementing certain things like performance appraisal, like selection methods that are aligned with the goals of the organization. Training is very similar to that. So we want to make sure that the strategic goals in terms of what the organization wants to accomplish over the next X number of years or X number of months making sure that training is aligned with that. Because if it's not, then the organization is probably not going to support it in the way that they need to for the training to be successful. Next, whether there is support for training. So an organization needs to be able to provide financial resources for training in terms of paying for the trainers, paying for the space, or if it's online, paying for the software. There are lots of factors that go into it, and so is the company ready to do that? Are they also willing to allow employees to attend the training during their work time? So this is another way that organizations support the training. If they relegate training to after work hours, for instance, employees are not likely to want to do it. So having time for employees to do it during their work hours is important. What resources will the company provide, or what resources are available for training? Which group of employees will be trained? Who will the trainers be? And looking at the external and the legal climate within which the organization functions. So looking at these external factors that can come in and influence the extent to which training can be successful. One example that is relevant to right now is that in the United States, the Trump administration has made it illegal for organizations to conduct certain types of diversity training. So this would be a factor that organizations and trainers and psychologists need to consider when they are asked to do diversity trainings. Are they going to be breaking the law in order to do so? What are the legal implications of that? On slide 9, we get into the next level of our training needs assessment, and this is job analysis. This term should sound familiar to you. We went over it a lot in Chapter 3. And just to remind you, a job analysis is when we identify the tasks that are related to the job and also the KSAOs, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that are needed to do the job. Additionally, critical incidents that employees deal with on the job. So as a reminder, those are when something critical happens, something of importance that happens within the organization, and how employees respond to those incidents. So in other words, the job analysis level identifies what needs to be done and what KSAOs are needed. So you would get that from your traditional job analysis. If the organization does not have an updated job analysis on file, at this point you may need to stop the training development and go back and update the job analysis first. The next step is a person analysis. And during this, the trainer would identify what current employees can actually do and what KSAOs they possess. So whereas the job analysis identifies the tasks and the KSAOs needed for the job in order to perform the job successfully, the person analysis says, okay, well, now that we know what those tasks and those KSAOs are that are needed, what do the employees currently possess? What are they lacking on? Where is the opportunity to provide training to help them improve? So during this step, you would identify a subset of KSAOs that some employees actually need to be trained on, or they are lacking on those. Where do you get this information? You can obtain it from performance appraisals, those ratings, performance ratings, productivity and sales, for instance, employee surveys, or tests. The next step in your training needs assessment is to articulate the training goals. So what are the goals for training? So training goals communicate what trainees are expected to learn in behaviorally specific terms. And by behaviorally specific, this means that you would look at actions, observable actions that the employees are required to do. And this is typically done by comparing, first of all, what the job analysis says that the employees should know and be able to do, And second, what the person analysis says that the current employees already know and can do. An example of a training goal is ability to make 3 different espresso drinks correctly in 2 minutes using the standard company equipment. So this looks similar to a task statement, correct? But the difference is that it has been identified as lacking in terms of some employees not doing it correctly, and or identified as necessary in terms of some employees not having that KSAO yet. Maybe they're new hires, or maybe they've been on the job for a while but still can't make it in this amount of time. So that would be what we're talking about as a training goal. The next step in your training needs assessment is a demographic analysis, and this includes a wide range of issues involved with understanding who the trainees are. For example, education level, age, how familiar they are with certain technology, especially if the training is online, motivation to learn. So are they motivated to go through the training at this time? And any personality traits. So these are considerations that will affect the format of the training in terms of how the training is developed. Will it be online? Will it be in person? Are there any pre-training considerations that need to be done? For example, if you're training someone on a statistical software package, and you're hoping to train them to do advanced statistical techniques, maybe they need some basic training first on how to use the software from a basic level. Also, in terms of the motivation for trainees, it might help to take some time to explain why the training needs to be done and how it aligns with the strategic goals of the organization. In other words, trying to help get people on board and get motivated to go through the training. Okay, so we've talked through the first step in the training process, and that is conducting your training needs assessment. Now let's talk about the characteristics of the trainees and the context. And what we're going to talk about here has to do with what's called transfer of training. And transfer of training refers to the degree to which training leads to actual changes in on-the-job behavior, hopefully improvements in on-the-job behavior. So transfer of training is very important. It goes beyond learning something. So there's a difference between learning something and having more knowledge, and using that learning or that knowledge to actually change behaviors on the job. So what we're hoping for when we're training employees is actual transfer of training, so translation of knowledge to on-the-job behavior. And unfortunately, some estimates are pretty low. One estimate is that only 20% of knowledge transfers from training to the job. So we can help increase that number as IO psychologists by doing things like helping organizations with needs assessment, helping determine the appropriate training context, and maximizing that transfer of training. Slide 15 has a model of training motivation and outcomes, and this is a lot of information, so I'm going to talk through it, and there is some additional information on the next slides. So what we're looking at here is an overall synopsis of what leads to transfer of training. Okay, so the transfer of training is over here in the right-hand box under training outcomes. So we'll start on the right-hand side and just talk through those. So the outcomes of training, obviously knowledge, so learning something that you didn't know before. Skills, so getting behavioral improvements in terms of actual skills. Transfer of training, which we just talked about, which is transferring the knowledge into actual behaviors on the job, and any other relevant outcomes that are similar to that. So these are what we're hoping to get out of training, these positive outcomes. So employees know more, they have better skills, they can translate those knowledge and skills into behaviors and lead to better job performance. Okay, so what impacts or what leads to these positive training outcomes? Well, let's take one step back. and look at this training motivation box. So training motivation is the motivation to learn and succeed in training. And that has been found to be very important in terms of these training outcomes. So if someone is not motivated to learn, they're probably not going to learn as much and probably not going to transfer that learning into behaviors on the job. So let's take another step back and talk about what affects that motivation, because that's really important here. So we have two major boxes, and these are the two categories of characteristics that lead to motivation to go through training and to learn. The first is individual characteristics, and this includes first cognitive ability. So this is also referred to as G, or generalized intelligence. The smarter or more intelligent someone is, the greater level of cognitive ability they have, the more they are able to learn from training, and that would transfer into outcomes. Personality, so certain personality characteristics have been linked to better success in terms of training, and we'll talk through some of those in just a minute. Learning style is also one, and knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. In terms of organizational characteristics, we have rewards. So is training expected? Are employees rewarded for going through training? That's going to impact their motivation. And the organizational climate and culture around training. So do managers, supervisors, and leaders within the organization prioritize training? Do they talk about it as a good thing? Do they willingly let employees attend trainings? Do they follow up with their trainees afterwards? Do they create this positive climate for learning and development within the organization? If so, the people who go through training are more likely to be motivated and more likely to have these positive outcomes from training. Okay, so in terms of individual differences, I already talked through higher cognitive ability, which leads to better learning of the training material and quicker learning of the training material. Also, in terms of personality, those who have higher levels of openness to experience, so being open to other different types of opportunities, those who are more extroverted or social, those who are more conscientious or diligent and detail-oriented, and those who have a more proactive personality, so looking for opportunities to make a difference and make an impact. These types of personality characteristics have been found to be associated with training motivation and better training outcomes, like transfer of training. In terms of the organizational category that we looked at in our figure here, this slide talks about transfer climate. Transfer climate is the degree to which the social climate among employees back in the work situation supports training and the particular type of training. Positive transfer climate has been found to enhance training transfer. So essentially what that means is if workers are generally happy about training, if they are talking to each other about the training, if they are supportive of one another as they learn in the training, if the supervisors are supportive of their employees going to training and using their skills that they learned in training, those are all things that lead to a positive transfer climate and a positive training climate, and those are found to improve worker motivation and training transfer. In the red box here, you'll see some recommendations to help enhance training transfer. So removing obstacles to transfer from the work environment, and being sure that trainees have a chance to apply what they have learned back on the job. So this sounds pretty basic, but it's very important. If employees go through a training and then they don't use the new skills that they have learned in training for a long time, say they go to a training and then a few months later they're asked to use those skills go away. So you don't always remember them. So you need to give employees opportunities right away to use what they learned in training and constant opportunities to continue to use those skills that they learned. Next, provide support to supervisors so that they can help employees apply the learned skills on the job. So supervisors may need some training for themselves to be able to help their employees apply those skills to the job. So providing supervisors with that support is helpful. Using real-world debriefs where employees discuss how they have applied what they learned back on the job. So maybe getting employees together after the training to talk about how they have used their new skills or their new knowledge and their new learnings, and talk about any obstacles to that and help them come together to kind of brainstorm that and talk about where they may have succeeded and where there may be obstacles and help each other through that. And finally, providing supports to employees like access to databases and resources if they have questions. So it's expected that employees will not remember everything that they learned during a training. Of course not. Nobody can do that. So providing them with opportunities to access training materials and quick FAQ pages and other types of things that will help them remember, that's very important. Okay, so just to recap, today we have talked about conducting a training needs assessment and considering the characteristics of trainees and the context. In the next video, we'll talk about choosing and administering the training method and how to evaluate training.